Okay. Chapter 7 on the turn of the screw. After leaving the, quote, Sea of Azov, the governess storms back to find Miss Grose. She seems to have recognized at the end that Flora not recognizing the apparition across the lake meant that that Flora clearly did recognize the apparition. The governess cannot accept the fact that Flora simply did not see. And this is going to be something that continues throughout. Her supernatural knowing that what other people are seeing, what other people recognize, this intuitive element that she seems to feel very strongly about, but is very ambiguous. Could very much just be something that that the governess herself is experiencing. It could very well not be anything to do with the assumptions that she's making. But we'll look at what she thinks. She comes in, tells Miss Grose, basically in hysterics, they know it's too monstrous, they know. The repetition, her madness kind of accelerating. If we look at it as madness, if we look at it as agitation, all that's definitely coming to a head. Miss Grose is trying to figure out what's happening. She kind of holds her. Miss Grose has her arms around her, right? As the governess is crying and, like I said, in hysterics. She says, as she kind of realizes what she's been thinking, 2 hours ago in the garden, I could scarce articulate, Flora saw. She says, I made it out to her, made it out perhaps only now with full coherency, even to myself. All these things are ideas that she's just been popping into her head, coming and going. And I think that's pretty significant. I think that's something that we need to be skeptical about. Miss Grose says, oh, Flora saw. She told you about it. She seems very struck by that. And of course, no, Flora didn't say anything. Not a word. That's the horror. She kept it to herself. The child of 8, that child. Instead of thinking that she didn't see anything, the governess is seeing possession, something evil, something very harsh. Remember when we were there at the Sea of Azov, the last thing that we saw Flora doing was taking a stick, trying to stick another twig into it, and making a little play boat, which seems fairly innocent. As they go and describe what happened, surprisingly, the governess doesn't stop to explain that there was a woman. Instead, just starts speaking as if Miss Grose would know everything that she means, and points out that no, it was a woman, another person this time, a figure of quite as unmistakable horror and evil, a woman in black, pale and dreadful, with such an air also, and such a face on the other side of the lake. I was there with the child, quiet for the hour. In the midst of it she came. They asked where they come from. We have no idea. I like when she says, for the effect and the feeling, she might have been as close to you. This idea that the governess feels very close and connected to these ghosts. Odd. Something to think about. And the governess has somehow puzzled together this idea that it's going to be the governess, the past governess. She shows how I had thought it all out. My predecessor, the one who died. Miss Jessel? Miss Jessel, you don't believe me? Why would Miss Grose believe her? She's never seen Miss Jessel. She has no idea about anything with Miss Jessel. She's jumping to conclusions. She's jumping to all of these inferences. She's somewhat hysterical. Very questionable is the governess looking right now. As they kind of go along, Miss Grose says, well, how can you be sure? The governess kind of shouts at her and says, then ask Flora, she's sure. No, for God's sake, don't, she follows that up with. She'll say she isn't, she'll lie. So once again, she's looking at Flora, she's assuming that Flora's going to lie about things. Just a chapter ago, she was calling them angelic, she said they were perfect, she saw nothing wrong with the kids, And now, clearly they're in on it. This sudden jump, this sudden affirmation that the governess seems to feel, seems very questionable. And it's something that everybody should be a little bit weary of. As she goes on, she says there are depths. The more I go over it, the more I see in it, and the more I see in it, the more I fear. Notice that kind of acceleration as she repeats the phrases as they develop a little bit more. The more, the more, the more, the more. Keeps on building and building an emphasis, but really kind of mimicking her hysterics, really mimicking her agitation. She goes on and says that her real fear is that she will not see the ghost, that the ghost will just be in contact with the children. Miss Grose says, for a moment collapse, here presently to pull herself together again. So from positive force of a sense of what, should we yield an inch, there would really be to give away to. Says, dear, dear, we must keep our heads, and after all, if she doesn't mind it, she even tried a grim joke, perhaps she likes it. And there's this strange idea that, Miss Grose is kind of making a joke about all this. Flora apparently isn't bothered by this apparition. She jokes perhaps she likes it, but what are they actually talking about? Is this possession that they're worried about? Is this the ghost coming in contact? We don't know. We don't know what these ghosts might be trying to do. We don't know what the governess thinks these ghosts are trying to do. All she does is shout about them being a horror, the fact that the children are going to lie and hide this, but that there might be more there. As the governess stresses the fact that the woman's a horror of horrors and that she's horrible and the worst person ever, Miss Grose says, tell me how you know. And instead of telling her anything, the governess shouts, and you admit that it's what it was, that it was she, that it was Miss Jessel. And once again, Miss Grose says, well, tell me how you know. She says, by seeing her, by the way she looked. They talk about how they looked. And she says basically that she stared at Flora. She only fixed the child. And she looked at her, not with something of dislike. She says, God help us know something much worse. What this is kind of leading into our idea of what the governess thinks the ghosts are trying to do. There's a kind of fury of intention to get hold of her. The clearest thing that we can kind of assume from this is possession. That Miss Jessel wants possession of Flora, and that Peter Quint wants possession of Miles. That's what's going on in the governess's head, at least. We try to develop this a little bit more, understand exactly how she's coming to these conclusions. It's kind of difficult. She describes Miss Jessel in mourning, rather poor, almost shabby, but yes, of extraordinary beauty. Miss Jessel was infamous. They're both infamous. And then we have some more information about Peter Quint and Miss Jessel. Okay. We discover, as the governor says, I need to know the story. I must have it now. What did she die? Come, there was something between them. Miss Grose simply says there was everything. The big question that pops up first is of rank and condition. That Miss Jessel was supposed to be a lady, but somehow was willing to have this connection with Peter Quint, who we know that Miss Grose already didn't like. Miss Grose seems to have a lot of dislike towards Peter Quint and his connection to everybody. So some of that bias might be playing into everything else. She goes on, talks about, the governess talks about, there was nothing to prevent an acceptance of my companion's own measure of my predecessor's abasement. She pictures, right, of the employer's late, clever, good-looking own man, impudent, assured, spoiled, and depraved. The fellow was a hound. Impudent, assured, spoiled, and depraved. Basically full of himself, cocky, a bit of a cad. Miss Grose thinks about it, says, I've never seen one like him. He did what he wished. At which point, the governor says with her. Miss Grose says with them all. And this is the second time that we've seen this reference to him having greater influence over many people. Something that we're kind of questionable about. We don't really know who she's referring to, what this exactly is, but assuredly she is talking about that. This kind of corruption of other people that are here. She then says, well, Miss Jessel must have wanted to be with Peter Quint, who, like I said, was somewhat handsome, but who was also a hound and a flounderer. When Miss Jessel disappears, Miss Grose says, I know nothing. I wanted not to know. I was glad enough I didn't. I thanked heaven she was well out of this. They talk about that she left. She left because she was the governess and was having an affair with a man at the house. Afterward, I imagined, and I still imagine what I imagine is dreadful, that this would just been horrible for her to have stayed and lived in this kind of den of sin. Goes into that kind of proper Victorian elements, that fear of sexuality, that restraint and repression that would have been really important. Otherwise, Miss Jessel and Peter Quint could have made a great, story by Nicholas Sparks. But instead, in Victorian times, it is sinful, it is corrupt, and of course they turn into ghosts that are trying to possess children. And that's where we are now as far as the suggestion. Do we believe all this at face value? I don't know. I think that we can question it. I think that we don't necessarily know for sure. But I do think it seems pretty clear that this ambiguity is taking control of the governess, and her fear and her agitation really makes us question her own ability to tell us a story and how true everything that she's telling us is. She kind of collapses here at the end. She says, I don't do it. I don't save or shield them. It's far worse than I dreamed. They're lost. She's basically lost faith in the children. She thinks that the children who, up to this point, were angelic cherubs, floating on clouds and little wings and playing harps, are now little devil children. That is her assumption. So the drastic change was pretty clear and is a little bit frightening. Okay. End of chapter 7. We'll continue with chapter 8.